All right, so I think we can start now since we got the recording up. All right, so welcome everyone to this workshop hosted by Design at UCI and Commit to Change. So today we'll be talking about how to build tech for social good. So first off, we'll introduce ourselves. So hello everyone, I'm Alan Chang. I'm the VP of Outreach and a developer at CTC.
Hey everyone, I'm Minja. I am the executive advisor and also a developer at CTC.
So let's go over what we'll be talking about today. So first off, we'll do a little bit about who we are and what CTC does. Next, we'll talk about tech and social good, and then designing for social good. And lastly, we'll cover how you can work to design tech for social good, or at a smaller scale, even if you're not necessarily working for NPOs or like designing projects specifically for this. So first off, who are we and what do we do at CTC?
So founded in 2020, CTC is a club at UCI, and our mission is to develop high quality software for nonprofits while giving students at UCI opportunities to design and develop tech with purpose. Next slide.
So we'll talk about how we can harness tech for social good in this section. So I like this quote a lot when we talk about designing tech for social good. Technology does not have intrinsic value. Its value lies in its application, which social, political, and economic power structures dictate. So what this means is that there's something that we call the deceptive impact of tech when it comes to designing these sorts of applications. So first off, usage is not necessarily correlated with impact. For example, you can have a lot of users using your app, but that doesn't mean it like necessarily impacts them in any way. Secondly, technology is a tool, so users can choose whether or not to use it, and how like they choose to use it affects how it will impact them. In the end, like we have to realize that like technology is kind of a choice that users take, and if they don't take it, then it can't really impact them. Thirdly, we have to consider like the unintended consequences. So on the other end of the spectrum, technology is incredibly powerful. And as such, it can have like a lot of serious consequences. So with great power, basically comes great responsibility. So some important questions that we need to ask here are which problems need to be tackled the most? Can we really use technology to solve these problems? And if we do, how will it challenge like the underlying norms and structures? And lastly, like how should we measure the impact of our technology? These are all things that like we should be considering because like they really affect how we build out and design our products.
So what do we have to keep in mind when designing a product intended to create a positive social impact? Next slide. So 3 key discussion points I'm going to bring up are design activism, 5 tips for designing responsibly, and the importance of empathy. So design activism is the act of using design to make a positive change in the world. And, it's a powerful way to use design, but there's more to design activism than, the things you see on the right, like infographics, posters, and t-shirts. Next slide. So we're going to do a deep dive into an article called 5 Tips for Designing Responsibly, written by Tabitha Young. Next slide. So tip number 1 from the article is to design with, not for. And we want to avoid wasted effort and investment, like you see in the article on the right, where wasted wells failed to solve Africa's water problems. So one way you can do this is that you should consider the people you're developing solutions for as teammates, and at CTC, our club considers our nonprofits to be partners. And we always have open discussions with them, conversations, and questions and answers that we use to get feedback and keep them actively involved as stakeholders. So we want to get their insights as much as possible because we are designing with them and not just, building a project that we're going to hand over to them at the end. Next slide. So tip 2 is to talk to and observe users to ensure that what you're doing is, in fact, actually serving their needs. So this is definitely related to tip 1, but it's important to ensure that your solution is actually useful to the community you're designing for. And to that end, you can conduct user tests. Again, feedback is key. And also branch out in terms of your research. You can consider resources like Reddit, Twitter, documentaries, and YouTube videos. And the goal in considering all of these different avenues is to put yourself in the shoes of the community you're serving, so that you can really understand what the issue is and design a good, effective solution that is useful to them. And you can also look at academic research for facts and figures to better understand the scope of the project. Next slide. So tip 3 is to work to eliminate and not reinforce harmful stereotypes and power imbalances. So as a designer, you should never work off of your own assumptions. Always work to educate yourself. So you have to be aware of the discourse around campaigns and solutions to social problems that could actually end up exploiting or offending communities. So what you can do as a designer is to understand the sentiments around the issue that you're trying to provide a solution for. Going back to the detailed research before you get started, and know that language matters, especially the terminology you use. Make sure it's proper terminology. And the image on the right is an example of what not to do. So this is a poster for the I Am African campaign, which actually received a lot of criticism for appropriating African culture. And what this was meant to do was to kind of raise up African culture and garner support for issues that were happening in that continent, but they end up doing the opposite. So it's really important to understand the proper terminology, the discourse around an issue, and don't reinforce these harmful stereotypes like this poster does. All right, next slide. Tip 4 is to test iteratively to get the best version of your idea possible. So you want to work to uncover any flaws in the system you're designing, and ideally during the design process and not after. So there's a good quote here that says, "You're in pursuit of the best possible solution for your users, not the coolest project you can put in your portfolio." So what you can do is ask for feedback multiple times in your design process. And even if you have to loop back to a previous stage, that's okay, because design is not a linear process. Always be open to changes and know that some solutions might create more problems. And the message of this slide is kind of encapsulated in the image on the right, which says that the faster you can fail and make mistakes, the faster you can achieve success. Next slide. So tip 5 is to strive for long-term, long-lasting, effective solutions. So, what we don't want is a short-term, ineffective solution that breaks like immediately once it's handed over. So what you can do to achieve sort of the goal mentioned in this tip is to think about how the system will scale over time. Make sure that your design works for years to come and can expand with its audience, if that ends up being, millions or billions of users. So think about what resources might be needed depending on the solution, and make sure you talk to the developers to understand how your design can be scalable in terms of, supporting as large of a user base as you need to. All right, next slide. So the biggest takeaway from these 5 tips is that empathy is key. So this is pretty much true anytime you design, but especially when you're designing for social good. So in conclusion, you need to educate yourself on the community you're designing with and apply what you learn to make the world a better place. Put yourself in their shoes. So next slide.
So I guess like that is a lot, but even if we're not necessarily building out a project for a social good cause, we can still find ways to do social good at a smaller scale without even partnering with a nonprofit. So some small scale actions that we can start taking right away kind of fall under three values. So these are accessibility, inclusiveness, and ethical tech. So we'll go over these a bit in the next few slides. So first off, accessibility. The main goal of accessibility is to make the digital world available for everyone. So this can be seen in tools such as voice-powered features and screen readers. There are some easy ways to incorporate this into your projects as well, such as alt text, which is text that would appear in image cat mode. This makes it easier for screen readers to kind of parse like what you're displaying on your text, and in general, it just makes it like easier to access for people who might like not be able to access it otherwise. And another way, which might be more design related, is related to color contrast. So there's this tool called Site Improve Color Contrast Checker, which lets you check that your color palette is really like compatible with accessibility. So there's that if you want to kind of design your color palette with that in mind. And we've also linked some other tips and tools for building accessible tech in this slide as well. Shoot, Mingja, can you link the presentation again in the chat? Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'll do that right now.
Yeah. So we also have inclusiveness and ethical tech. So inclusive tech mostly refers to what Mingja was talking about before. We want to design like with our shareholders and not for them. So this includes people such as excluded and diverse communities, because representation does matter. We want to foster this belonging with representation as much as possible. And that's really only achieved if we work with the stakeholders directly instead of kind of keeping them separate from our product. And ethical tech kind of considers values such as surveillance and bad actors. So surveillance is how can we protect user privacy? If we collect user data, how does that like affect maybe our application and its security? And how can we work to make sure that our users have a safe and secure experience on our product? These are definitely things to consider, as well as bad actors. So mostly, how can we prevent malicious users from kind of using our tech to harm others? Does our tech like have any sort of tool that might be used for harmful impact? Definitely things to consider because, like I said, technology is very powerful, and as such, it can have very powerful consequences. So there's a tool called Ethical Explorer that we can kind of use to follow these values. It's also linked in this slide. Here you can also kind of see more values related to designing tech for social good. So that's linked right there. We'll go over some of CTC's technical challenges because designing for social good is inherently kind of with its problems as well. So these are lack of luxury, need for speed, and product decisions. Lack of luxury. So when you're designing tech for social good, you're not really doing it for the money. Like the resources are kind of saved so that they can be distributed back to kind of the cause. So that means you work with little to no resources. So you have to rely on services such as AWS Lambda, RDS, or Heroku, which can potentially increase your technical complexity in exchange for a lower cost. Need for speed. So since we're kind of working to solve problems that haven't really been solved technologically yet, there's always pressure to get this done on time. You might not have time to optimize something, and as such, you definitely have to like rush a few things, but in the end, you want to know that the things you're rushing aren't going to negatively impact your application or the impact on its users. And lastly, product decisions. So of course, you have to keep in mind that since you're designing a technological solution, there might be something in the real world that already kind of solves the same problem. You want to kind of think about how your technology can build upon that existing physical solution, or how it can even improve it or enhance it. And these are all product decisions that impact real users. So you have to keep in mind like how your enhancements will impact these users as well. So some additional resources that we have here are job boards and kind of resources at UCI in general. So job boards are like kind of just ways that you can get involved right away in tech for social good if you'd like. one example of this is Design Gigs for Good. So this is kind of a job board where you take on like design related tasks that are for social good. So that's linked right there. And at UCI, you can definitely take classes or even the minor in civic and community engagement that kind of just exposes you to all of these social topics and how you can kind of be aware of these topics and how you can get involved. UCI's Cross Cultural Center also hosts a lot of talks and events too for free. In general, like there's a lot of resources that you can seek out if you're more interested in this field. So now we'll open up the floor to questions. So if you have a question for us, feel free to raise your hand or ask away in chat. So thank you for coming out to this presentation. We'll be sticking around to answer any questions that you guys still might have. But if you want to keep in touch with us and commit to change, we've got our website and links down there in the bottom left. And since we're a part of this design-a-thon, certain like notable projects might have the opportunity to have their projects developed by us this coming spring quarter. So just indicate your interest on your submission form. And if your project is a match, we'll get back to you later. Thanks for coming, guys.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.